So this here is a painting video on how to paint the Malignant Plaguecaster. We've actually done two models. We've done this one here where we change the face and the extended arm is holding a pistol. And then we have this other model, which is pretty much the traditional look with the cloud of flies. So if you like the way both of these look and you're interested in making yours look the same, please stay tuned and we'll show you how we got here from just bare prime model. If you want to see a few other views, skip ahead to the end of the video and you'll find a few other pictures from different points of view just to get some of the details you may be missing. Otherwise than that, thank you for watching. Please feel free to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, be great, and leave a comment if you feel up to it. Otherwise than that, stay tuned and we'll show you how we painted this guy up. So this here's a video on how to paint the Malignant Plaguecaster. So this is the guy from the Dark Empyrean box set, and I'm not super happy with the model. I don't like his face with the little blowing mouth puff thing, and I really don't like the cloud of flies coming off the end. So I did mod a second one, where I swapped his face in assembly with a Space Marine face, and because he can be armed with a pistol, I swapped his arm with a one holding a pistol. And so we're going to do both of these at the same time with just the slight differences. One to maintain originality, and one because this is probably the one I'm going to use when we're playing. As well, it's easy to keep track of both of them when they're going to be on the table. One will be a little shooty and one will be a little cloud of flies. So we'll do both of those now and we'll see how they turn out. So the first thing we did with our Malignant Plaguecaster, as you can see, is we primed him. And we primed him with the Mechanicus Standard Gray Spray from Games Workshop. So he looks basically like a gray model, but he is primed, so the paint will stick to him much better. So that's what we've got so far, and we're going to start adding some color in a few minutes. So the first color we're going to put on our Plaguecaster is going to be Death Guard Green. We're going to use a nice watered down layer here, and we're just going to spread that over everything piece of armor that's going to go green in the long run. Don't worry if we make a mess, if you go over some of the other stuff, because we are going to come back and do the trim and everything else later. As your base color and your first color, this is the one you have the biggest margin of error on. So this is our Malignant Plaguecaster after we finish with the Death Guard Green. And we did both arms as well as the front chest piece, which is all ripped apart. Both legs. And then on the back end, both legs again. As well as up on top of the backpacks, the two shoulder pads. And then the other arm going that way. And we basically did the same on both models. So we made them pretty identical. So we'll wait for all of that to dry, and then we'll meet back here in a few minutes. So back to our Malignant Plaguecaster, what we're going to do now is add a highlight layer, of which we're going to use some Nurgling Green, which is a lighter green than the Death Guard Green. And we're going to dry brush that right over everything we've done with the Death Guard Green already. So, like I said, it's a lighter color. It's going to give us a highlight layer. So we're just going to dry brush that right across. It'll give us some edge highlights. Lighten up the armor a little bit. But mostly we're here because we want to add some depth. So here's our two models that can clearly show the difference between that highlight layer of Nurgling Green and not. So as you can see here, we've got the highlight layer all along the edges there. It really stands out on the back armor, on that back foot. As you can see there, we've essentially got an edge highlight on each of those panels, whereas here we don't. So we're going to do the same dry brush on him, and we'll be back in a few moments again for the next color. So now that our Nurgling Green highlight layer is finished, what we're going to do now is take a little bit of Balthasar Gold, and we're going to start doing the trim on the model. So we'll do all of that now with that Balthasar Gold, and we'll meet back here in a few minutes when it's all done. So this is our model now that we finished with the Balthasar Gold. And as you can see, we did the trim and the shoulder pads, the two balls on the top of the backpack here. We did the trim on the forearm, as well as on the upper shin, the knee, and the bottom of the thigh shin plates here. Same thing on the other side. We did the designs on the end of each of the tabards and cloths, and all of the trinkets and things that are on top of the staff and hanging from the entrails and around the rest of the model. So the next thing we're going to do now is start to do some of the bone processes. So we're going to take a little bit of Rakarth flesh, and we're going to start doing things like the face, make sure we get good coverage on that. We're going to do all of these horns, all of these tentacles coming out, as well as the teeth coming off the front here, and some of the larger entrails down below, and then all of these tentacles coming out of the legs and things like that. So we'll do all that now with Rakarth flesh in both models, and we'll be back here in a few minutes. So this is what we look like now that we finished with the Rakarth flesh. So as you can see, we did the teeth here, as well as the face. We did all of these horns, the proboscises here. We did the horn coming out of the shoulder pad here. The one over here coming out of his side. The few little tentacles that are coming out of his wrist. The other one's dropping down from his shoulder. The one's coming out of his foot, out of his heel. Other ankle on this side, same there. The one's coming out of the toe. The other underarm there. And then because we cut off the cloud of bugs, and, cloud of flies, and we turned it into a pistol, we're going to call all these tentacles as well. And so we'll treat them as such, so we did those as well. So that's all of the Rakarth flesh on this model. We'll do the same on this one here. And then we'll meet back again in a few minutes. We're not going to do the cloud of flies this time because that's going to do a different color later on. So we'll do that now and we'll be right back. So now that we're finished that, what we're going to do next is the wood on the staff, as well as the holster he's got back here. And with all of that, we're going to use Dryad bark. So we're just going to lightly color in the staff like that. Same thing with the holster, and we'll be back here in a few minutes once that's all done. This is our model now. We finished with the Dryad bark, and as you can see, we did the stick. Then we just doubled back and took a little bit of Rakarth flesh just to do the banners that are, or the cloth pieces that are holding on the trinkets, just to bring that all together, and it'll clean the rest of it up when we shade it. So that's kind of where we sit now, and we're going to move on from there. Next thing we're going to do now is come back and do some of the metallics here. So that's this cable, respirator on this particular head, all the chainmail that's dangling from the waist, as well as the one through here, the gun bits that are in the holster, as well as the gun itself that we've added, some of the piping on the backpack, and the 3 spikes on the top. So we're going to do all that with some Leadbelcher. So we'll do that now, both models, the tubing and stuff on the top as well. And anyway, we'll do all that. We'll meet back here in a few minutes and we'll see how that looks. At this point now, we're ready to add our first shade to our model. And what we're going to use is we're going to use some Agrax Earthshade. And what we're going to do is shade almost the entire model. We're not going to do the face because we want to make that more redder than darker. We are going to do the teeth, the green armor, the back, anything that's metallic, anything that's painted brown, anything that's painted brass, and then we're just not going to do any of the tentacles here because we're going to save those for a different shade in a few minutes. We're just going to take a little bit watered down Start going over our armor. Just like so. And what we're going to try to do is push it more into these holes. So we want some of the detail, but mostly we want to just fill in some of the gaps. Like I said, avoiding the tentacles, which we're going to do in a few minutes. But we'll keep working at this. Don't worry if anything goes in the stomach area. We haven't done that yet. That's coming. So we'll keep going at the armor here, as well as all the metallics, adding a rusty look to the metal. Now that we finish with our Agrax Earthshade, what we're going to do now with our two models is we're going to take a little bit of Reikland Fleshshade, and we're going to do the faces. We're going to do this face here, and then we're going to do the face in here as well, just to add some depth to that, but not making it brown. A little bit of Reikland Fleshshade. Just like so. Pushing it into each of the corners there so we get a little bit more detail like we like there. Just like so. We'll do the same for the other one here. So we'll leave that like that. Leave that shade dry. We'll be back in a few minutes. So with our Plaguecaster, what we're going to do now is start working on the gore in the center. So with that, we're going to put a base layer of Screamer Pink down. So we'll just take a little bit of that Screamer Pink. We're just going to start coloring in all this gore area here. And Screamer Pink is a base color, so you should get some good coverage with it. And don't forget the entrails that are hanging out. Then we're going to start our shades now. So we've got a Carroberg Crimson, and what that's going to do is all of the entrails, as well as anything that's tentacle-like. So all of these tentacles that are coming out of the sides here, that's all going to shade with Carroberg Crimson. And our second shade is Saraphim Sepia. That's going to do anything that's horns. So all the things coming out of the top of the head, the ones on the upper shoulders, this one here coming out of the leg, and probably this one here coming out of the foot. So we're going to do that one with Saraphim Sepia, and we'll meet back here once both of those two shades are finished. So our next step is to add a highlight layer, and what we're going to do is take a little bit of Pink Horror, and we're just going to dry brush that right over this central area here. Getting down to as far as there. So just doing this central bulbous area here, and then these entrails will hit in a few minutes with a different color. Now for our second part of the entrails, we're going to dry brush on some Slaanesh Gray, and that will go over this intestinal type area here that's hanging out, and we'll get something that looks like that. So that's our plan. So we'll do the other one, just like I said, a dry brush like that, right over this area, and we'll be back in a few minutes when that's done. The next part we're going to do is take a little bit of Ungor flesh, and we're just going to go over all of these little pustules here. just like that. And finally, we're going to take a little tiny bit of Cadian Fleshtone and dry brush that over both the Ungor flesh and the pink horror. So just like this. And that'll blend both of those colors back together again. Just like that. Next thing we're going to do is light up the staff with a highlight. And Gorther brown will do, but pretty much any light brown will do. And then just dry brush that right over the staff. Just to create a two-tone effect there. So now we're going to start on the hood, which we've been putting off for a little while, but it's one of our last items left to do. So we're going to start with a base of Demonette hide, and with that, we're going to very carefully coloring all the trim here. So just like this, we're going to start it on coloring it in purple. And we're going to use a very watered down layer, of course. It is a base paint, so it'll get some good coverage, but it may take 2 coats to get the color we want. So now that we're finished with our Demonette hide, we're going to add a shade to the hood. With that, we're going to do it with some Druchii Violet. We're just going to brush that right on there. With a fairly small brush, we'll just start painting on our shade, which will add a purple color to it, as well as bring out some of the detail in the cloth, like that, see? So we'll do that, add that in like so, and meet back here in a few minutes once our shade is finished. So this is our hood now that it's been shaded. So the only other thing we have left to do there is a highlight layer. We're going to use our Slaanesh gray again and just put a very light dry brush over this entire hood. And just like that. Just like so. So we'll finish off that. We'll meet back here in a moment. So now that we're done with our hood and the tabards that come off it, we're going to put a highlight layer on all of the brass, of which we're going to do it with Brass Scorpion. So there's going to be another little, almost like an edge highlight. We're just going to tap each of these spots there, almost like a dry brush. So we'll do that. We'll meet back here in a few minutes. So the next step we're going to do is just one more highlight layer. We're going to take a little bit of Screaming Skull, and we're going to do each of the teeth in the chest. Just very, very delicately. Just put an edge highlight on each of those. So while we're using our Screaming Skull, we're also going to do the back piece here, this set of rags we have here. So we're going to do that right now. just a nice layer of Screaming Skull, and probably have to put 2 coats of this on it. So we'll do that now, and we'll meet back here in a few minutes. Now that we're finished with our cloth, what we're going to do now is add a shade over that. And what we're going to shade it with, we have a bunch of options, but we're going to use Saraphim Sepia, which is a little bit reddish and a little bit dirtier. So we're going to put that loosely over all of our cloth. So we're just going to brush that straight on. Just like that. And now that our shade is dry, what we're going to do is one more dry brush, and we're actually going to use a little bit more Screaming Skull. So we're going to take a little bit of that, and this time it's a dry brush, so we don't want very much at all. And we're just going to get the top layers on that, and sort of create a little bit of a highlight there. That's what it looks like now that we finished with our Screaming Skull highlight. We're going to add one more little highlight layer. We can do that with just a tiny bit of Pallid Witch Flesh. And we're just going to hit the very, very tips of the highlights. And it's a very, very bright layer, as you can see. So we only need a little tiny bit. We're just putting a very light dusting on it there. The next thing we're going to do on our model is just these couple of tubes that we have back here. There's a few of them there, and there's one more on this side up here. We're going to do all those with Bugman's Glow, and then any metallic sticking through we're just going to touch with some Iron Breaker. But for the most part, we're looking at Bugman's Glow for this. And we're just going to gently give them a coat. You may require 2 coats. If you have to, just add them on. In any case, we'll meet back here in a few minutes once that one's done. The next step we're going to do is just a quick little bit of Moot Green. And all we're going to do with that is hit these little drips that are coming down from the entrails. Just like that there. And then one more back here. So we'll hit those and we'll meet back here in a few minutes. So the last thing we're going to do in our model is the cloud of flies that's coming off his hands here. It's not on our other model, it's just on this one. So what we're going to do with that is we're going to base it with Screaming Skull again. And similar to what we did before, we're just going to put a good base layer on it, and we'll be back here in just a few minutes. Now the clouds have been done with a base coat of Screaming Skull. What we're going to do now is we're going to shade them all with some Casanadora yellow, and that'll bring out the yellow tints that are in the Screaming Skull. So we'll use it straight out of the pot. Now that our Casanadora yellow is dry, what we're going to do is dry brush over the top of that some Pallid Witch Flesh, just to lighten it all back up again. So just a quick dry brush right over that. And just like so. And finally, what we're going to do is take a little bit of Waywatcher green glaze, or any other glaze, or a watered down contrast paint, but something exceptionally watery and a little bit green. And then what we're going to do with that, we're just going to put a little bit here and there. And spread it around a little, just to make it more green than yellow. Add to that side there. Just do the same thing over here. So this is the final product for the cloud of flies. We also colored in some of the flies while we were waiting for things to dry. So this here is pretty much the finished model. What we're going to do now is just clear coat it and then add a little bit of Nurgle's rot to the slimy drips here, just to add a second color to those. So we'll meet back here when the whole thing's finished. So this here's our final model, and as you can see, we've got the cloud of flies done and everything else is done. It's based and clear coated. We added a little bit of Nurgle's rot to those drips coming down in the center entrails there. But aside from that, the model's pretty much finished. Now, if you like this model and you like this video and you thought it was pretty good, please feel free to leave a like, leave a comment if you thought it was really good, and feel free to subscribe to the channel. And aside from that, there'll be some other photos of some other views of the models at the end of this video. But all things considered, we're pretty happy how it turned out, and we will see you again at our next painting video.